I was 16 years old at the time and lived with my parents in a rural area of eastern Tennessee, very close to the Appalachian Mountains. This was in the early 2000s when cell phones weren't something everyone carried all the time and GPS basically didn't exist for us. My father worked as a self-employed electrician, and during that period he was doing some jobs in remote cabins, the kind used only during hunting season or by people who wanted to stay isolated. On that specific night, he needed to take heavy tools to one of those cabins early the next morning and decided to cover part of the drive ahead of time to save time. I went with him because he didn't like driving alone at night on those roads, and to be honest, I always helped with those things. It was cold, a damp cold that seeped through your clothes, and the sky was completely dark, with no visible moon. The road we took was narrow, full of sharp curves, with no lighting at all, just the car's headlights cutting through the darkness. It was one of those roads almost no one used after dark, with no houses nearby, no signs, and barely any shoulder. I remember the smell of oil and metal from the tools in the truck bed, and the sound of them lightly clanking with each curve, mixed with the constant hum of the engine. We didn't talk much, more out of habit than anything, and the radio picked up nothing but static in that area. I was tired, kind of bored, staring out the window, trying to see anything beyond the dense trees on both sides. On a curve tighter than the others, the kind that forces you to slow down a lot, the headlight suddenly illuminated someone standing right in the middle of the road. It wasn't gradual. It was instant. 1 second there was nothing. The next there was a man there, exactly in the center of the road, completely still. My dad slammed on the brakes and the car jolted hard, making the tools crash loudly in the back. The engine died immediately, leaving only a heavy silence broken by the sound of our own breathing. The man didn't move an inch. He was wearing clothes that looked old, a dark, slightly oversized jacket, simple pants, and worn boots. He didn't look dirty, but he also didn't look like someone who had just stepped out of a house. What struck me most was the way he stared straight at the car, not at me or my father, but at the headlights, as if he were looking at us through the light itself. There was no clear expression on his face. He didn't look angry or scared, just standing there as if he were waiting for something. My father kept trying to start the car, muttering under his breath, and I felt a strange knot in my stomach, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Time felt wrong there, stretched out. The man remained still, not reacting to the stalled car, not raising a hand, not speaking, not stepping back. When the engine finally started again, my eyes never left him for a second, and that's when I realized he simply wasn't there anymore. The road was empty. There was no shoulder, no open trail, just dense forest on both sides. My father accelerated without saying a word, and all I managed to ask, my voice shaking, was whether he had seen it too. After the car started moving again, my father didn't slow down on a single curve. He drove tense, both hands glued to the steering wheel, staring straight ahead as if any second of distraction would be dangerous. I tried to look in the rearview mirror, even knowing it made no sense, but some part of me expected to see someone standing behind us. I saw nothing but the dark road fading away. The silence inside the car was heavy, different from before. He didn't even try to turn the radio back on. I asked if the man could have jumped into the woods, but my father said there was no way. There was no space at all, just embankment and dense trees, uneven ground, no trail, no clearing. We passed the curve again a few seconds later, the headlights lighting everything up once more. There was no one there. No sign of someone running, no sound of footsteps, nothing. Just the empty road and the same smell of damp earth coming from the forest. My heart was still racing, and I felt cold sweat running down my back despite the night's chill. My father told me not to mention what happened to anyone when we got home, that it was probably a drunk person or something in our heads. But from his tone, it was clear he didn't believe that either. He had known that road for years and had never seen anyone there at night. It felt like we had passed through a place we weren't supposed to be at that hour, as if we had crossed an invisible line. We reached the cabin much later than planned, unloaded the tools, and drove back with almost no conversation. On the return trip, I watched every curve, every tight stretch, expecting to see that figure again, but nothing happened. Even so, the fear didn't go away. When we got home, it took me a long time to fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, The image of that man standing in the middle of the road came back vividly, especially the way he never reacted. The next day, my father mentioned what happened to someone he knew in the area, an older guy who had lived there his whole life. He got serious immediately and said something that bothered me more than the encounter itself. He said he had heard similar stories before, always on that specific curve, always at night, always involving people who had no real reason to be passing through there at that hour. He said, almost like a warning, that some things show up when someone passes where they shouldn't. He didn't explain further and didn't seem willing to continue the conversation. We never took that road at night again. To this day, when I think about it, what scares me most isn't the idea that we saw something supernatural, but the certainty that it was real, solid, right there in front of us, and then simply wasn't anymore, without sound, without explanation. If my father hadn't managed to restart the car, I don't know what would have happened. And that's the kind of thing that stays with you, even after so many years. After we left that road, I stayed quiet, but my mind wouldn't stop. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation, someone who heard the car and jumped aside quickly, even though none of that made any sense. The image didn't match that idea. He didn't look startled, didn't react to the braking, didn't take a single step. I remember noticing the detail of his clothes, how the jacket looked far too old for someone walking there at night, and the fact that he was clean, no mud, no leaves, nothing to suggest he had come out of the woods. Inside the car, the air felt heavier, as if the windows had been closed even though they were open. The smell of gasoline and hot metal was stronger after the hard stop, and my stomach stayed twisted. My father finally spoke while driving, telling me not to look back if we had to stop for any reason. That gave me a lump in my throat because I had never heard him talk like that before. He was always calm, the type who handled everything without drama. That night he seemed genuinely disturbed, almost afraid. I watched the shadows of the trees rushing past in the headlights, each one seeming to move strangely as the road curved again. At one point, the car sputtered slightly, nothing serious but enough to make my whole body freeze. My father gripped the wheel and cursed again, and my heart pounded so hard it felt audible. I stared straight ahead, expecting to see that silhouette appear again out of nowhere, right in the middle of the road. It didn't happen, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It was as if the darkness around the road was closer than before, more enclosed. When we finally reached the main road, wider with a few distant lights, only then did I feel my body start to relax a little. Even so, I had the sense that it hadn't been just a passing scare. Something about that encounter felt final, as if it had marked that place in a way we didn't understand. To this day, whenever I think about that specific curve, I get the strange certainty that it wasn't the man who was out of place that night. It was us. After that, we entered a flatter stretch, and my father finally slowed down a bit. He took a few deep breaths, as if only then realizing how tense he had been. I tried to start a conversation, asking if he had ever heard a similar story before, but he cut it short, saying he didn't want to talk about it that night. The way he said it made it clear he wasn't just trying to calm me. He himself didn't want to think about what he had seen. As we got closer to home, a few scattered houses began to appear, porch lights on, dogs barking in the distance. That usually gave me a sense of safety, but that night it didn't help much. I kept replaying the scene in my head, trying to remember some detail that would explain how someone could simply disappear like that. I wondered if he could have dropped to the ground or hidden behind the embankment, but there wasn't enough space. The road was too narrow and the surrounding terrain too uneven. There was no way someone could have run off silently in just a few seconds. When we parked at home, my father turned off the car and sat there for a few seconds, staring ahead before getting out. He had never done that before. Normally, he'd turn the key and open the door right away. That stuck with me, because it felt like he was trying to organize his own thoughts before going inside, as if he didn't want to bring that with him into the house. In the days that followed, I noticed my father change small habits without saying anything. He avoided going out at night on those more remote roads, even when it meant taking a longer route. When someone mentioned that part of the Appalachians or an old road around there, he changed the subject. I tried talking to some friends at school, but I didn't tell the whole story. Just said we'd had a scare on the road. One of them joked that those curves had a bad reputation among older locals, That bothered me more than I expected. Later, I overheard two adults talking in a store about people who appear out of nowhere on old roads, always in specific places, always at night. They spoke in a serious, low tone, like people discussing something they didn't like to remember. No one laughed. No one seemed to think it was funny. That gave me the feeling that what we saw wasn't an isolated case. It wasn't a made-up story to scare a teenager. It was something people knew about but preferred not to face directly. And that, to me, was even more disturbing than the encounter itself. Over time, I began to realize that that night had stayed with me in a strange way, more physical than emotional. Whenever I drove on any winding road at night, my body reacted before my mind did. My hands would get sweaty, my chest would tighten, and I'd automatically scan the road ahead, right in the middle of the lane, looking for something standing there. It wasn't fear of an accident. It was fear of finding someone. The detail that came back most often was the silence. Not the normal silence of night, but that heavy silence when the car died and everything froze for a few seconds. No insects, no wind, nothing. It felt like the whole place had held its breath along with us. I remembered his face without being able to clearly define it. If someone asked me to describe specific features, I couldn't. I only remembered the fixed, direct stare, no curiosity, no surprise. That bothered me because it didn't feel like an encounter between two people. It felt like he already knew we were going to pass there. Sometimes I wondered if he was trying to stop us from going on, or simply marking his presence. Those questions would come out of nowhere, especially at night when the house was quiet and I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to sleep. A few months later, seemingly unrelated, that stretch of road was partially closed due to a small landslide. It wasn't anything major, but enough to block access for a while. When I heard about it, I felt a strange, almost automatic relief, as if something had finally been put back in its place. My father mentioned offhand that maybe it was for the best, and didn't say anything more. We never spoke directly about that man again, but I know he remembers it the same way I do. Even now, more than 20 years later, the image still comes back sometimes, usually when I'm driving at night and take a sharp curve on a little used road. Whenever that happens, I slow down well in advance, even without any apparent reason. Part of me expects the road to be empty, and another part is certain that if I pass through certain places at the wrong time, something might be waiting. Not because it wants to do something specific, but simply because that's how it's always been there. And that idea, that there are places we simply shouldn't pass through, has stayed with me since that night. There's one detail I took years to admit to myself because at the time I was too focused on trying to seem rational. While the man was standing in the road, before the car fully died, I noticed a strange smell entering the car. It wasn't the smell of vegetation or wet earth. It was drier, almost like clothes that had been stored for a long time, mixed with a faint metallic scent. At the time I associated it with the car, the brakes, or the tools, but it never left my mind afterward. When the engine shut off and we sat there stopped, that smell became stronger for a few seconds, as if it had come from outside. I remember breathing through my mouth without realizing it, as if my body was trying to avoid inhaling the air. When the car started again and he disappeared, the smell was simply gone, vanished as quickly as he had. I never mentioned this to my father because I thought it might sound like it was all in my head, but to this day, when I smell something similar in an isolated place, my body reacts the same way. It's an automatic reaction, hard to explain, like an alarm that switches on by itself. Another thing that bothers me is thinking about the exact timing of that encounter. I can't say whether it lasted 5 seconds or 30, but it felt stretched, out of normal rhythm. Much later, my father mentioned that the car had never stalled like that before, nor started up again so quickly. It was a simple, old vehicle, but reliable. He always took good care of it mechanically. That didn't fit the car's history. Sometimes I catch myself wondering whether the engine dying was what really put us in danger, more than the man himself. If the car had stayed dead longer, if it hadn't started again, I cut that thought off quickly because it always leads somewhere without answers. What stayed with me is this unsettling sense that there was some kind of pause there, an interruption, and that we only got through it because something, for some reason, let us go. The ending of all this wasn't a big event or a clear explanation, and maybe that's what bothers me most. There was no new appearance, No official confirmation, no accident afterward that gave meaning to what happened. Life simply went on. I grew up, moved out, my father got older, and that road became just one of many in the region. But that specific curve never stopped existing in my mind. Years later, already an adult, I passed relatively close to it during a trip, during the day with friends. I recognized the stretch almost unintentionally. It looked too normal in daylight. Green trees, an ordinary road, no sign of anything wrong. Even so, my body reacted the same way it had that night. Sweaty hands, tight chest, a strong urge to keep going without stopping. I didn't tell my friends anything, just asked that we not take that smaller road, and we went another way. That night at the hotel, I kept thinking about how some experiences don't need to repeat themselves to stay alive. They lodge in the body, not just the memory. Today, looking back, I don't try to name what we saw anymore. I don't say it was a ghost or a supernatural warning or anything like that. What scares me is the opposite. The possibility that it was something too real, something tied to the place, the moment, the fact that we shouldn't have been there at that time. When I remember the way he stared at us standing in the middle of the road, unhurried, unreactive, the feeling that remains is that we weren't directly threatened. We were simply noticed. And somehow, released. Since then, I respect empty roads at night in a way many people find excessive. I slow down before curves, avoid isolated shortcuts, and trust that strange feeling in my stomach far more than urgency. Because that night, in the Appalachians of Tennessee, I learned that there are places where the only thing protecting you is not being there when you shouldn't be. Story 2. I was 17 years old when this happened, and I lived with my parents and my younger sister in a rural area of North Carolina, far from any big city, one of those regions where houses are spread far apart from each other. The house was old, built long before we bought the land, with wooden floors that creaked and thick walls that held in the cold during winter and the heat during summer. Our water came from an old artesian well, dug decades earlier according to the previous owner. That was common there. Almost everyone depended on a well. That particular year, the region went through a severe drought, the kind that leaves the ground cracked and the air constantly dusty. It hadn't rained for weeks, and neighbors started saying the wells were dropping fast. Some ran completely dry, others could only draw a little water during the day. My parents were worried, saving water, avoiding laundry, taking quick showers. Even so, our well kept working normally. The pressure was the same, the water didn't taste strange, and it wasn't cloudy. At first it felt like good luck. Then it started to feel strange. At night, when the house was quiet, I began to hear sounds coming from the yard, right in the direction where the concrete cover of the well was. It wasn't constant or loud. It sounded like water being disturbed, as if someone were pulling or pushing something down there. The thing was, the pump was turned off at that hour. There was no reason for the water to be moving. The first time I thought it was my imagination or some pipe adjusting, because old houses make strange noises. But the sound came back on other nights, always after everyone had gone to sleep. It was a wet, heavy sound that came in waves, like something slowly rising and sinking. When I opened my bedroom window, I could hear it more clearly, especially on warmer nights when the air was still and there was no wind at all. The sound didn't seem mechanical. It had no machine-like rhythm. It was irregular, almost as if something were using the water itself to move. It started to make me uneasy, but I still tried to come up with a logical explanation so I wouldn't dwell on it too much. After a few nights of hearing it, I decided to mention it to my parents at breakfast. My father gave an awkward laugh and said it was probably the old plumbing reacting to the heat or to the lack of water in the surrounding wells. My mother didn't seem as convinced, but she didn't want to panic either. She just said the well had always been very old and maybe it was pulling air along with the water. Still, that night I decided to go out into the yard to listen more closely. I waited until everyone was asleep, grabbed a small flashlight, and went outside barefoot, feeling the dry, cold grass under my feet. The silence was heavy. No crickets, no wind, just that sound coming from below. The closer I got to the well, the clearer it became that it wasn't coming from any pipes, it was coming straight from inside it. The concrete cover was in place, but the sound seemed to pass right through it, as if the water were very close to the surface. I knelt beside it, placed my hand on the cover, and felt a faint vibration, almost imperceptible, but real. My heart started beating faster, and I felt that strange urge to back away as if my body were reacting before my mind did. Even so, I lifted the cover carefully and set it on the ground. The smell that came out wasn't exactly bad, but it was old. Too damp, like earth that never sees the sun. I pointed the flashlight inside and saw the reflection of the water below. At first it looked normal, still dark. I watched for a few seconds, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from, when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The surface of the water began to move on its own. Not outward in circles like when something falls in, but the opposite. Ripples rose upward, pushing the water up, as if something were moving from below to above against gravity. The flashlight shook in my hand and I struggled even to breathe. I didn't see anything solid, no defined shape, just the wrong, insistent movement. Then I heard a crack behind me and nearly dropped the flashlight into the well from the shock. I slammed the cover shut too fast, scraped my fingers, and ran back into the house without looking back, with the clear feeling that I should never have opened it. I barely slept that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to convince my brain that it had been some kind of light effect, pressure difference, anything that could be explained. Even so, every time I closed my eyes, I saw the water moving in that wrong way, rising when it shouldn't. My body stayed on alert, as if I were still kneeling beside the well. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the same sound as before, only closer, stronger. It was no longer muffled by the ground or walls. It sounded like the water was being stirred more forcefully, as if something were getting closer to the surface. I lay there listening, trying to decide whether to wake my parents. Part of me was afraid of sounding dramatic. Another part was afraid of what might happen if no one did anything. The sound lasted a few minutes, and then stopped abruptly. The silence afterward was worse. It wasn't normal silence. It felt like the entire yard was too empty, completely lifeless, no insects, no wind, nothing. The next day, we learned that the nearest neighbor's well had completely dried up overnight. He came to our house to ask for water, visibly embarrassed. My father helped him, as he always did with neighbors, but I noticed he grew uneasy when the man commented that our well seemed too good for that drought. Later, when it was just the two of us in the yard, I worked up the courage to tell him what I had seen. I didn't go into detail, just mentioned the sound and the movement of the water. He didn't laugh this time. He got serious, staring at the well as if deciding whether he really wanted to know more. That afternoon, an older neighbor who had lived there since childhood stopped by to talk about the drought. When the subject of the well came up, he went quiet for a few seconds and said something that sent an immediate chill through me. He looked straight at the concrete cover and said in a low, almost casual tone, "That well was never just water." He didn't explain, didn't elaborate. He just changed the subject right after. The way he said it made it clear it wasn't a joke or an offhand comment. It was a warning. After that, my parents decided it was best not to mess with the well more than necessary. No opening the cover at night. No standing near it without a reason. Even so, the sounds didn't stop. They became less frequent but more intense when they did happen. Sometimes it sounded like someone pulling water up with their hands from below. Other times it felt like a slow, heavy shift, like something large changing position. I avoided looking into the yard after dark. When I had to go out to grab something from the car, I went quickly without a flashlight, without stopping. The air near the well always felt colder than the rest of the land, even on hot summer nights. One night I woke up to my sister calling my name, scared, saying she'd heard water breathing outside. I went to the hallway window and heard it too. It wasn't exactly water running. It was a rhythmic, wet sound, like something slowly rising and then stopping, repeating. It lasted a few minutes and then suddenly stopped, as if it had realized it was being heard. I closed the window carefully and didn't say anything to her, just told her to go back to bed. A few days later, the pump began to fail for the first time since we'd lived there. It didn't burn out or break completely, it just sputtered, as if it were pulling something too heavy. Water still came through, but it was colder than usual, and it had a faint metallic taste it hadn't had before. My mother started buying bottled water to drink without saying why. No one said it out loud, but you could feel the whole house adjusting around that well as if it were something that needed to be respected. At night, I dreamed about water rising, never overflowing, just getting closer and closer. I always woke up sweaty with the feeling that something had stopped just beneath the ground. The drought kept punishing the region, but our well stayed full, persistent, active. And the more the others dried up, the more certain I became that this wasn't relief. It was a sign that something down there wasn't leaving. What finally made my parents decide was something simple, almost trivial. One morning, the water came out of the tap with small dark particles, almost like fine grains of sand mixed with something softer. There was no strong smell, but it didn't seem normal. My father shut off the pump immediately. He didn't mention what I had seen nights before, nor the older neighbor's comment, but I could see in his face that this was the limit. That same day, he called a company from outside the region to evaluate the well. The technician arrived in the late afternoon, examined the structure, measured the depth, and stayed silent for far too long. He said the well was deeper than the old standard for the area, and that there was no way to guarantee safety without major repairs. He recommended sealing it. That night, while the house slept, I heard the sound from the yard one last time. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was slow, almost restrained, as if something were moving while knowing access was about to end. The next morning, the well was sealed with concrete. The sound never came back. The drought ended weeks later, and the other wells in the area slowly returned. Life went on as it always does. But since then, I've never been able to look at old wells the same way. It's not fear of water. It's the sense that not everything that sustains a house was meant to be understood. Sometimes, when I remember that night with the flashlight pointed inside, what bothers me most isn't the idea of something alive down there. It's the thought that the well had always been active, even when it shouldn't have been, even when everything around it was drying up, as if it were responding to something else, on a different rhythm. We never talked about it as a family, and I never brought it up again with the older neighbor. But to this day, when I hear water moving at night without a clear reason, my body recognizes the sound before my mind does, and I step away. Story 3. I was 21 years old at the time and living in Western Virginia, in a small town where there wasn't much to do at night besides driving around aimlessly or going to someone's house. 3 friends and I decided to hike up a little visited mountain in the area to watch a meteor shower that was predicted for that early morning. The idea was simple. Get away from the city lights, set up camp, drink a little, and spend the night watching the sky. None of us were trail experts, but we'd camped before and knew the basics. The mountain wasn't touristy and had no infrastructure at all, just an old trail occasionally used by hunters. We arrived in the late afternoon, parked the car on a dirt stretch and hiked up with backpacks, tents, and flashlights. The place was too quiet, even by the region's standards. No nearby roads, no distant lights, just trees, a light wind, and the dry sound of our footsteps on the ground. We set up the tents on a small plateau, relatively flat, with an open view of part of the sky and other elevations around us. The temperature dropped quickly after dark, and the humidity made the air heavy, clinging to our skin. We talked quietly, more out of habit than necessity, and the mood was calm, almost boring at first. It was already early morning when we saw the first red light. At first, I thought it was some distant light, maybe a tower or someone using a flashlight on another part of the mountain, but it quickly became clear it wasn't that. The light turned on bright red at the top of a hill opposite ours, sharply defined against the darkness, then went out a few seconds later. We fell silent, all staring at the same spot. A few seconds later, it turned on again. Same intensity, same duration. It didn't move or flicker, it was always in the same place. One of my friends said it looked like a flare, the kind used in emergencies. That made no sense there. There was no road, no direct trail, no reason for anyone to be signaling in the middle of the night, let alone repeating it at such regular intervals. Every time the light came on, I felt a strange tightness in my chest, like it wasn't random. It didn't feel like someone desperately asking for help. It felt controlled, like whoever was there knew exactly what they were doing and wanted to be seen. We stood there, almost unconsciously counting the intervals, trying to decide whether it was something we should ignore. After a few minutes, curiosity won out. One friend suggested someone might be lost or injured, and that we should at least try to get closer and see what it was. None of us felt comfortable with that idea, but no one wanted to be the person who ignored a possible cry for help. We grabbed our flashlights, left the tents up, and started heading down toward the hill, where the light was coming from. The problem became clear very quickly. The terrain between the two elevations wasn't continuous like it looked in the dark. There was a major drop, areas of dense forest, and a section that turned into a steep embankment, impossible to cross without equipment. Even so, we kept walking a bit, trying to find a side route. Meanwhile, the red signal kept turning on and off, always at the same rhythm, as if patiently following our movements. At no point did the light shift. There were no shouts, no other sounds from over there. Just the faint wind and that red flash cutting through the darkness from time to time. That started to bother me more than if someone had been screaming. It was too quiet. After about 20 minutes of trying to find a viable route, we gave up. There was no way to reach it without putting ourselves at real risk of falling or getting lost. We decided to head back to camp and figure out what to do calmly. On the way back, hardly anyone spoke. It felt like the entire mountain had closed in, grown darker, as if the space itself had shrunk. When we got close to the tents, I felt something was wrong before I even saw it. The ground around them was marked. They weren't deep footprints, but you could clearly see a pattern of steps around the tents, as if someone had been walking in circles while we were gone. They weren't animal tracks. The spacing was too human. My stomach dropped immediately. That's when one of my friends pointed behind us toward the mountain we'd been on earlier. The red signal was there now. Same light, same intensity, same regular interval. But it wasn't coming from the opposite hill anymore. It was coming from behind us, exactly from the place where we'd spent most of the night. Everyone's first reaction was to look at each other. Like someone might laugh and say it was a joke. No one laughed. The red signal lit up again behind us, briefly illuminating the trees at the top of the mountain, right above where the tents had been before we left. I felt a chill run up my spine, not from the cold, but from understanding. There was no way this could have happened the way it appeared. There was no direct trail, no way someone could leave that opposite hill, circle all the way around, and climb up here in the same time we were gone, especially carrying a flare. And yet the light was there, steady, calm, repetitive. The marks on the ground made it clear that someone had been at our campsite while we were trying to reach the other mountain. There was no sign of the tents being touched, nothing taken, nothing torn. Just the footsteps, walking around, too close. It felt like it was never a call for help. It was a way to make us leave, and it worked. We didn't argue much after that. We started tearing down the tents in a rush, tripping over our own gear, hands shaking, flashlights dropping to the ground. The signal kept blinking behind us at the same rhythm, no faster, no slower, as if it were simply marking its presence. At no point did we see anyone holding the light. There was never a silhouette, a movement, anything. Just the red glow appearing and disappearing in the dark. When we finished packing, we practically ran down the trail without looking back. I stumbled more than once, scraped my hand on a rock, but I didn't stop. Only when we reached the car, doors closed and engine running, did I dare to look one last time toward the mountain. The light was still blinking up there, distant, as if nothing had changed. When we reached the main road and the trees began to thin out, it disappeared completely. We never talked about it with anyone outside the group, not because we thought no one would believe us, but because none of us wanted to hear someone confirm that it wasn't the first time. To this day, whenever I see an isolated blinking light on a mountain or roadside at night, my body reacts before my mind. Because that night, it became clear to me that someone knew exactly where we were, and wanted us to know that. The next day, already back home, we tried to act like it had just been an exaggerated scare caused by exhaustion and darkness. No one messaged the group chat about it. No one joked. That alone was strange, because normally anything even mildly scary would be talked about for weeks. This time, the silence felt like an unspoken agreement. A few days later, I ran into one of the friends by chance at a gas station, and without planning to, we brought it up. He asked if I also felt like the signal wasn't asking for help. I said yes, that it felt more like a warning. He said that since that night he'd been looking at maps of the region and aerial photos, trying to understand how someone could have moved like that between the points. He found nothing that explained it. The distance was too great, the terrain too difficult, no shortcut, no hidden trail. That only reinforced the feeling that the movement hadn't happened while we were watching. It was as if the light had always been where it needed to be, regardless of where we were looking. Over time, everyone moved on with their lives, but that night stayed marked in a very specific way. Not as a vague memory, but as something very clear, very concrete. I remember the regularity of the signal, the exact interval between flashes, the way the ground around the tents was marked, unhurried, orderly. It didn't feel sneaky, it felt deliberate. To this day, I avoid camping in very isolated places, especially in mountainous regions. It's not fear of animals or getting lost. It's the feeling that there are places that are too high, too visible, where someone can always be watching, even when you think you're alone. And sometimes all that person wants is for you to know you're not. What bothers me most when I think about that night isn't the idea of someone unknown walking around our tents. It's the control. If it had been someone disoriented, lost, panicking, none of it would have been so precise. The signal never failed, never changed rhythm, never sped up or slowed down when we moved. The footprints weren't from someone running or hiding. They were calm, complete steps like someone who had plenty of time to walk, observe, and leave without haste. And the strangest part is that if the intention had been to scare us, it would have been much easier to just appear, make noise, show themselves. Instead, whoever was there chose something simpler, making us leave on our own. Without confrontation, without explanation. Even now, years later, I remember exactly how that red signal cut through the darkness of the mountain. It didn't blink like a normal flashlight or an electric light. It was sharp, direct, functional. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if it was meant to look like a call for help on purpose, because it knew people like us would try to get closer. And when that wasn't possible, the message changed. Not with words, but with position. When the signal appeared behind us, there was no longer any doubt about who was being watched. Since then, I trust that feeling that something is out of place far more than any carefully made plan. Story 4. I was 15 years old that summer, and I spent my vacation helping my grandfather on his farm in southern Kentucky, in a very isolated area far from town and from nearby neighbors. The property was old, the kind passed down through generations with crooked wooden fences, aging barns, and a constant silence broken only by insects and the distant sound of some animal. My grandfather woke up before sunrise, and I went with him more for company than obligation. He was a quiet man, spoke little, and didn't like to explain things too much. I slept in a small room in the main house with a window facing the yard and a direct view of an old shed that stood farther away, almost at the edge of the woods. From the very first day, he made one rule very clear. After sunset, I was not to go into that shed under any circumstances. It wasn't a generic warning. It was said seriously, looking straight at me, with no room for discussion. I thought it was strange, but I accepted it. Farms sometimes have strange rules, and I didn't want to look stupid questioning it. The shed itself didn't look any different during the day. It was large, made of wood darkened by time, with a high roof and thick, exposed beams. Inside were old tools, some machines that no longer worked, and a lot of empty space. During the day, I went in there with my grandfather without any problem. At night, though, he always locked the door with a thick padlock. I began to notice that when the sun started to go down, he paid closer attention to the time and always made sure everything was closed before it got fully dark. He never explained why. He would just say it wasn't time. That particular night, the day had been long and hot, and I was tired. After dinner, my grandfather realized he had forgotten a tool he would need early the next morning. He said it out loud, a little irritated with himself, but decided he'd get it in the morning. Wanting to help, and also to prove I wasn't a kid anymore, I said I could grab it quickly before it got completely dark. He looked at me seriously again and told me to leave it alone. I waited a few minutes, watched him go to his room, and decided to go anyway. I grabbed a weak flashlight and walked toward the shed, thinking I'd be in and out in less than a minute. The sky was already dark when I reached the shed door, but I could still see a little without the flashlight. The padlock wasn't locked that night, which gave me a strange feeling right away, like something was out of place. I pushed the door slowly, and it creaked far too loudly in the farm's silence. I went in quickly, trying not to think too much, and turned the flashlight on just enough to light the ground. The air inside was colder than outside, with a strong smell of packed dirt and old wood, mixed with something more closed in, almost stale. I took a few steps toward the corner where the tool usually was, feeling the uneven ground under my boots. That's when I heard a sound above me. It wasn't wood popping or the noise of a small animal. It was a slow, heavy dragging sound coming from the ceiling beams, as if something were moving carefully, trying not to make noise. I froze immediately, the flashlight pointed at the ground, afraid to raise the beam of light. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it inside my head. I stood there trying to figure out if it was a rat, a raccoon, or anything that made sense, but the sound wasn't hurried or random. It felt deliberate. When I finally found the courage to look more closely, the flashlight illuminated marks on the dirt floor that I was sure hadn't been there during the day. They were areas more compacted, as if someone had stood there for a long time, repeatedly, always in the same spot. They weren't clear footprints, but the shape suggested weight distributed in place, standing still, not moving. The sound above me stopped at the exact moment I noticed that, and the silence that followed was worse than the noise. I felt a chill run up my arm and a strange pressure in my chest, like the air had gotten heavier. I grabbed the tool without even checking if it was the right one and turned around, almost tripping. I rushed out of the shed, slamming the door behind me, and only then realized my hands were shaking. When I turned, I saw my grandfather standing a few meters away, watching me in the dark, with an expression I had never seen on his face before. He didn't look angry. He looked worried. He came closer, gripped my shoulder firmly, and said in a low, almost tired voice, "Now he knows you exist." I didn't understand what he meant at the time. My body was in shock, my mind blank, that sentence just echoing without meaning. I asked who he was, but my grandfather didn't answer. He just led me back into the house with his hand firmly on my shoulder, as if he were afraid to let go. We went in without turning on the outside lights, and he locked the door behind us more carefully than usual. Inside the house, the smell of old coffee and aged wood felt stronger that night. I sat on the bed, still holding the tool without even realizing I'd brought it with me. My grandfather stood in the doorway for a few seconds, looking at me as if he were evaluating something. Then he told me not to go outside after sunset anymore, not even to look out the window toward the shed. He said it firmly, but quietly, as if he didn't want anyone to hear. That scared me more than if he'd yelled. I lay down without really changing clothes, my body tense, listening to every creak of the house as it cooled. During the night, I woke up a few times with the feeling that someone was walking outside. I didn't hear clear footsteps, but I could sense the ground responding, that dull sound of dirt being pressed down. At one point, I found the courage to lift the curtain a little and look out into the yard. The moon lit things enough for me to see the outline of the shed, standing exactly as it always had. I didn't see anyone, but I was certain something had changed. The air felt heavier, as if the farm had grown smaller. I went back to bed with my heart racing and stayed awake until the sky began to lighten. The next morning, my grandfather acted as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, commented on the weather, talked about the day's work. But before we left the house, he stopped at the door and told me, without looking me in the eyes, that some things stay quiet as long as they don't know they've been seen. After that, he said nothing more about the shed. The following days passed with a tension that was never spoken, but always present. I avoided any reason to go near the shed, even during the day. It wasn't a rule my grandfather needed to repeat. I simply couldn't look at that place the same way anymore. Sometimes, while helping out in the fields, I felt like I was being watched, especially when my back was to the woods. It wasn't constant paranoia, just brief moments when my body reacted on its own. My grandfather changed a few habits too. He started bringing tools in earlier, closing doors before the sun fully disappeared, and more than once I saw him standing in the yard at dusk, looking toward the shed without doing anything, just waiting for it to get dark. He never left the padlock unlocked again. On the last night of my vacation, shortly before I went back to my parents' house, I woke up to the same sound I'd heard inside the shed. A slow, dragging noise from above, only this time distant, as if it were moving across the shed's roof. I didn't hear shouting or animals, just that careful movement. I lay still in bed, remembering the marks on the ground and the way my grandfather had spoken to me. The next morning when I left, he hugged me longer than usual and told me not to mention any of it to anyone in the area. He said some presences stay away as long as they believe they're alone. Today, years later, what bothers me most isn't thinking about what was in that shed. It's knowing that for a moment I made it clear that I was there. And that was enough. On the drive back, I tried to convince myself it had all just been teenage fear mixed with poorly explained stories. But the more I thought about it, the less that held up. My grandfather was never superstitious, never talked about strange things or tried to scare me. He was practical and straightforward, and he avoided the subject the way someone avoids something that caused too much trouble in the past. Over time, the memory of the sound and the beams became less vivid, but the feeling didn't. Whenever I think about that night, my body reacts the same way, with a tightness in my chest and the certainty that I crossed a boundary without understanding it. It wasn't innocent curiosity. It was ignoring a warning that existed for a very specific reason. Now, as an adult, I understand better what scares me about that story. It's not imagining some creature or something unreal. It's thinking that there are places where people learn to live with certain things simply by avoiding attention. My grandfather didn't seem constantly afraid. He seemed careful, like someone who knows exactly how far he can go. And that night, for a few minutes inside that shed after sunset, I did exactly what I shouldn't have done. I made noise. I used light. I made it clear I was there. And from the way he said it, it was obvious that whatever was inside responded in the only way it needed to, by noticing. Story 5. I was 28 years old at the time and worked doing night deliveries in southwestern Pennsylvania, mostly in rural areas of the Appalachians. They weren't fixed routes, but always secondary roads with little traffic, passing through small villages and long stretches with absolutely nothing around. I had been doing this for almost 2 years, so I was already used to driving in the dark, in fog, heavy rain, and that strange silence that only exists far from cities. I drove an old company van, no luxury at all, but reliable until then. At that point in my life, I preferred the night shift precisely because it was predictable. Fewer people, less traffic, less conversation. I got into the van around 9 at night and only returned near dawn, crossing roads that always seemed the same even when the route changed. It was in this context that I began to notice a specific house, isolated, always set back from the road but visible enough to draw attention. It didn't happen all at once. It was something that repeated gradually until it became impossible to ignore. The house appeared on different routes, on different nights, always in the same condition. All the lights on. Living room lights, bedroom lights, porch light, sometimes even an upstairs light. It didn't matter if it was midnight or 4 in the morning, if it was raining, snowing, or covered in heavy fog. It was always far too illuminated for the place where it stood. There were no other houses nearby, no street lights. Just that one, alone, too bright in the middle of the dark. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Then I figured it might be someone with security issues or some kind of home business running at night. But the more times I passed by, the more wrong it felt. There were no cars parked, no movement in the windows, no shadows passing, just light. Always light. What bothered me most was that I could never remember exactly where the house was on the map. It simply appeared along the road and then vanished from my memory as soon as I passed it. Even so, every time I saw it, I felt an immediate discomfort, a knot in my stomach, as if something was out of place. Still, I kept driving, trying not to think too much about it. Over time, I started to anticipate the house even without knowing exactly when it would appear. On some nights, I felt my body tense a few minutes beforehand, as if it recognized that stretch of road before my mind did. When it appeared, it was always the same. After a long curve or a stretch of dense trees, the darkness suddenly broke with that overly strong illumination. I would slow down slightly without realizing it, just to pass it more quickly afterward. I never thought about stopping. I never thought about honking or calling out to anyone. It didn't feel like a place where someone was awake waiting for visitors. It felt like a place that was simply on. The silence around the house was different from the rest of the road, heavier, as if the normal sounds of the night simply didn't reach it. No insects, no audible wind, just my engine and that constant glow coming from the windows. One autumn night, close to 3 in the morning, the temperature had dropped a lot and a low fog covered the road. I recognized the stretch as soon as I entered it and felt that familiar knot. The house appeared ahead exactly as always, all the lights on, cutting through the fog in a strange way. That's when the van started to lose power. First a slight sputter, then another, until the engine died completely. I managed to pull over onto the narrow shoulder, and the van stopped directly in front of the house. Before I even tried to start it again, all the lights in the house went out at the same time. Not one by one. All at once, as if someone had flipped a single master switch. The darkness became complete, heavy, and for a few seconds I heard only my own breathing and the metallic ticking of the engine cooling down. That's when I noticed a slow movement on the porch. I didn't see a clear shape, just a shadow shifting slowly, as if something were standing up after being still for a long time. I sat frozen in the van for several seconds, trying to understand whether this was really happening. The fog made everything more closed in, and the darkness felt larger now that the lights were off. The movement on the porch continued, slow, dragging, with no hurry at all. It didn't look like someone stepping downstairs or walking normally. It was more like a careful displacement, as if whoever was there were feeling the space before advancing. I tried to start the van again, turning the key too fast, and the engine responded only with a dry click. That's when I felt physical fear, the kind that dries your mouth and makes your hands tingle. The clear sense that I shouldn't be there, stopped, watching. The house, which had always been nothing but light, was now a dark mass, and that made everything worse. The silence was absolute, as if even the sound of the world had been turned off along with the lights. When the shadow seemed to move a little farther across the porch, I didn't wait to see anything else. I threw the van door open, grabbed only my phone from my pocket, and started running down the road, away from the house. I didn't think about calling anyone. I didn't think about using the phone's flashlight. I just ran, feeling the gravel slip under my feet and the cold air burn my chest. At no point did I hear footsteps behind me, and that was what terrified me the most. The total absence of sound made it feel like I wouldn't know if something were getting closer. I only stopped when I reached a more open stretch of road where the fog began to thin. I looked back once and saw nothing. The house was no longer visible, not as a silhouette, not even as a dark shape. It was as if it had never been there. I walked for more than half an hour before I got cell service. I called the company and explained that the van had broken down on an isolated stretch of road, without going into details. Another driver was sent to pick me up, and when he arrived, I was still shaking, trying to look normal. On the way back, he asked exactly where the van had been left so he could notify the tow truck later. I tried to explain, used reference points, curves, approximate distance, but the more I talked, the more I realized I couldn't place the location properly. I didn't remember a sign, a fence, anything beyond the house. He ended up saying he didn't know of any building on that specific stretch. I assumed it was just a lack of attention on his part and dropped it. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lights shutting off all at once and that shadow beginning to move, far too slowly. In the days that followed, the van was declared a total loss and the company reassigned me to other routes, always closer to the city. I accepted without complaint. A few weeks later, out of curiosity, I tried to retrace the route during the day using maps and memory. I drove for hours on similar roads, but I never found the house. I didn't see a foundation, didn't see a driveway entrance, didn't see any sign that something had ever been there. I asked 2 longtime residents of the area about isolated houses with lights always on, but neither knew what I was talking about. One of them commented somewhat seriously that in that area many old things had been abandoned or simply avoided over time. He didn't explain further. I stopped looking after that, not because I was satisfied, but because I understood there was no point. After that night, I was never able to drive truly isolated roads the same way again. Even on new routes, when everything became too dark and my vehicle was the only thing moving, I stayed alert for any light that felt out of place. Not the faint glow of a distant house, but light that was too strong, too clear, too constant. More than once I slowed down just because I saw something shining far away, and my body reacted before I understood what it was. Whenever that happened, I felt the same knot in my stomach, the same urge to pass quickly and move on. I never saw the house again, but the feeling it left stayed with me. It wasn't fear of a robbery or someone suddenly appearing. It was the strange certainty that if something wants to be seen that way, it isn't by accident. What bothers me most looking back is realizing that the house never tried to get my attention when I was just passing by. The lights were always there, but they never changed, never flickered, never did anything until the exact moment I was forced to stop in front of it. It was only when I couldn't leave that everything changed at once. The lights shut off together and the movement began. It didn't feel rushed, it felt like something that had been waiting. To this day, I don't know whether that house had always been there or if I only started seeing it once I began driving those routes regularly. What I do know is that on that night when the van stopped and everything went dark at once, it became clear that it wasn't an ordinary place waiting for someone to pass by. It was a place that reacted when someone stayed. After some time, I quit the night shift. I didn't tell the full story to anyone at work, I just said I wasn't feeling well driving at night anymore. No one pressed me. I stayed in the region for another year, and even avoiding those back roads, sometimes I still felt that same tightness in my chest when I saw an isolated house with too many lights on. I never stopped. I never slowed down to look more closely. I learned to respect that reaction without trying to rationalize everything. It wasn't panic. It was a silent warning, the same kind that made me run that night without thinking twice. Even now, when I remember the shadow moving on the porch, what bothers me most isn't imagining what it was, but the rhythm. Everything was slow, calculated, as if there were no need to hurry. The strangest part is that if that house had never turned its lights off, I might have gone on with my life thinking it was just another rural road oddity. But the moment I became vulnerable, stopped right in front of it, everything changed at once, as if the facade had been switched off along with the performance. There was no clear threat. There was no chase. There was no sound. Just the very distinct feeling that I had been noticed at the wrong moment. I never went back to retrieve the van, never tried to prove anything, never talked about it in detail outside of here. Because some things don't need an explanation to make the message clear. That house wasn't there to be visited. It was there to be passed. And the moment I couldn't move on, it became obvious that I had stayed too long.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.